Okay, so today we're talking about graphs of sine and cosine. This is from your homework 14.1, the graphs of sine and cosine worksheet. Number 1 says determine the amplitude and period of each function. So if we take a look here, we need to, I'll put up here how to calculate the amplitude and period of a sine or a cosine function, where if the function is a sine of x or a cosine of x. Or for the period, you have sine of bx or cosine of bx. Now, obviously, you can have both a and b in a function at the same time. To find the amplitude, we find the absolute value of a. To find the period, we find 2 pi over the absolute value of b. So let's go ahead and determine the period and amplitude of this function. So if I were to write this out as, here, get my marker back. So if I were to write this out and I think about the general form of a sine function, I have y equals a sine of bx. So here my a is 1 and my b is 4. So if I think about the amplitude being the absolute value of a, my amplitude is 1. And my period would be 2 pi over the absolute value of 4, which the absolute value of 4 is just 4. So here I can just simplify this, and this becomes pi over 2. Not so bad. Let's take a look at the next problem. Number 6, it says circle the type of function, the sine or the cosine, and give the amplitude and period of each function graph below. Well, here I have to take a look at the graph to figure out if it's sine or cosine. The way I remember between sine and cosine is sine would start at the origin and then go up to a full amplitude, and cosine starts at the amplitude, either positive or negative, and then goes down towards the x-axis. So here, if I take a look at this one's actually starting at the amplitude, which here I can see is 4, so this must be a cosine function. The amplitude, which I just talked about, is the height of our waves. And the height of our wave here, it goes from a 4 to a negative 4, and amplitude is always positive. So our amplitude is 4. And then our period is, when does a full cycle complete? Okay, so here I would think about a full cycle being going all the way down and all the way back up again. And so if I think about this, if I look at my period, it looks like this is going up by pi. So this is pi. This is pi over 2. This is pi. This is 3 pi over 2. And this would be 2 pi, or negative 2 pi. So it looks like our period is 2 pi. Okay, so the last thing we're going to do is we're going to graph. Number 8 says give the amplitude and period of each function. That will help us with our graphing, and then we should sketch the graph over a period of 2, or over from negative 2 pi to positive 2 pi. So first of all, we have to figure out our amplitude and period. So if I just write the general form right above here, let's just erase that. I should usually have y equals a times the cosine of bx. And here my a is a negative 1 and my b is a 1. Well, amplitude we talked about earlier is the absolute value of negative 1, or the absolute value of a, which would be just 1. And my period is going to be 2 pi over 1, or 2 pi over the absolute value of b. So let's go ahead and start to sketch our graph. Well, we know that we need to go from negative 2 pi to 2 pi. So here I'm going to think about this being negative 2 pi. And here this is going to be a positive 2 pi. And actually, let's go in just a little bit from that. Let's go negative 2 pi. And here's positive 2 pi. And if I think about dividing that by 4, each mark would be pi over 2, right? So if we took, 2 pi and divided it by 4, then I could simplify that to pi over 2. So that's what I want each of my marks to be when I think about my markings for a graph. So here I'm going to have 1, 2, 3. This would be pi over 2. This is just pi, and then it's just pi over 2 pi over 3, 3 pi over 2. Okay, and then I can do the same in the negative direction. Negative pi over 2, negative pi, and negative 3 pi over 2. So then I have to also think about my period. Well, my period my amplitude, excuse me, has an amplitude of 1, so that's my y values. So I'm just going to think about this as being 1, and this as being 2, and here I'll go 1, negative 1, and then negative 2. So then the next thing I have to look at is, what am I dealing with? A cosine function or a sine function? That will tell me where I'm going to start my graph. Well, here I have a cosine function, which means I don't start at the origin, I start at the amplitude. And it's a negative cosine function, so that means I'm going to be starting at a negative amplitude. So let's go ahead and get a different color here. Now that I did all my other good stuff, let's do green, let's say, and we'll go ahead and graph this in green. So we go at a negative amplitude, which we go negative 1, and then I'm going to go through pi over 2 and up at pi, and then I go back down and end at 2 over pi for that period. And I can do the same thing, go up through negative pi over 2. By the time I hit pi, I should be at an amplitude of 1. Go back down, and then go back down to an amplitude of 1 to negative pi over 2. Now, my graph is a little sketchy. I mean, you should have a much more fluid curve. It's a little bit hard to do on the computer here, but that is the general idea as far as when you are graphing a cosine function. The sine function will be very similar. The only thing is you would start at the origin instead of starting at the amplitude on the y-axis. If you have any questions, please hear me, Mr. Daniels, and enjoy your homework.